With just 1 week to the Nevada Republican caucus, Trump is already celebrating as he is all but guaranteed a victory.
I didn't know she was still campaigning. She said, she's still campaigning? And she didn't come to Nevada because they looked at a poll and I was at 97%. She said, I think we're not going to win Nevada.
Haley decided to skip the contest, instead pouring all of her effort into South Carolina, where she trails Trump by over 30%.
But let me tell you, when we got off the plane this morning, it's a great day in South Carolina.
The former UN ambassador and South Carolina governor is the only remaining major GOP candidate fighting to topple Trump and become the Republican presidential nominee. It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so just to dive right into it, a recent poll shows 67% of Americans feel they pay too much in federal income tax. And these numbers may not seem surprising to most, but Trump is heavily campaigning on cutting taxes. How can the current administration calm voters' concerns?
Well, first off, I'd like to know the 3% who think they're too low, right? You always find those polls funny. What I would say is that polling is pretty standard for what we see in public polling around taxes over the last 20 or 30 years. By and large, people think they're spending too much. It's interesting when you follow up with a question, would you mind paying taxes if you thought your money was being spent better? And that's when people tend to soften on it a little bit. And so that's where I think we line up with what the Democrats and Republicans are trying to do in the Senate now with a tax bill, and where President Biden is trying to push on a lot of the economy. Really leaning into that. But yes, taxes are going to be an issue this cycle, and it's going to be one of those things where Donald Trump and the Republicans, they're talking about it now. We'll see what the Democrats are able to pull out of the Senate and the House and how they frame it in the election cycle.
Yeah, it seems standard for a lot of Republicans to really go in on taxes, throughout the history of U.S. campaigns. But, speaking of campaigns, Scott, Nikki Haley has started to pick up a little momentum in the past few weeks, but she's still trailing Trump by 30% in South Carolina. Does a defeat for Haley in South Carolina mean the end of the road for the Haley campaign?
So that's a very interesting question. What I would say the end of the road for the Haley campaign is when she runs out of money to get on that plane to go to that next state. And, we've been reading in the Hill all this week. There's been quite a bit of fundraising activity on her part, both on both coasts, as well as small donor fundraising. So she's certainly going to have the money to go into South Carolina. I think she's going to have to somehow meet or beat expectations. And I don't think expectations are she's going to win South Carolina. But if she loses by more than 30 or 40, it may be, and she spends all her money to do that, she's not going to probably have enough money to go all the way to the Super Tuesday states. But really, it comes down to, does she have that grassroots donor support to keep her going?
Yeah, and her campaign is certainly, letting reporters know that they believe they have the grassroots donor support. But moving on, a new Bloomberg Morning Consult poll found that 53% of voters in 7 battleground states would be unwilling to vote for Trump if he were found guilty of a crime. Scott, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but could this really affect Trump's chances?
Absolutely, it could. And you know what? This is the second data point to show something similar. There's a series of New York Times Siena polls done a couple months ago that showed the same thing. So 2 data points, and there will probably be some more data points as we get into the election season that corroborate that. This is definitely something Trump should be worried about. But on the flip side, a poll is a snapshot in time. Donald Trump will certainly have the opportunity to, if convicted, campaign back and potentially win some of those voters back. And that sounds kind of funny to say. He'll be able to campaign back if he's convicted, but that's how it works.
Right. And, moving on to Biden, the president's approval rating numbers have sat below 50% since August of 2021. Historically, the numbers aren't in the president's favor, with one-term presidents going back to Carter, Bush, and Trump, all going into re-election under 50% approval and all losing. Is the writing on the wall for Biden's chance at a second term?
It's certainly not a good data point, but we are in this new norm. The new norm over the last couple presidential cycles is both candidates, so to speak, not necessarily the incumbent, both candidates tend to have underwater approval ratings. We saw that in 16, we saw that in 20. And so it's something that, yes, over the course of 40 or 50 years, that's a bad data point. But if you look over the last couple of cycles, it is certainly possible for a Joe Biden to overcome that. If we just look at the stats, the economy is good. Now, the public doesn't agree with him on that, but the economy is good. If he can flip the economy and get the public to believe him on the economy, or at least feel that good economy, that would be a data point that would counteract and maybe even lift up that approval rating.
So we have these two very unpopular candidates, the front runners in their own respective primaries, but we have these third-party candidates really trying to gain advantage or take advantage of that. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is one of them. He's hinting at looking to run as a Libertarian. While he still faces huge hurdles with gaining ballot access, do you think he could build enough momentum to sway voters away from Biden?
You know what? It's funny. The polling shows that he can sway voters away from Biden and he can sway voters away from Republicans. Now, it's interesting to me on the ballot access. This is something Michael Bloomberg looked at doing and said, hey, it's going to cost $1 billion. I'm not going to spend $1 billion. I'm going to go take the Democratic ticket. That appears to be what RFK is doing. RFK does not have $1 billion. Libertarians need a candidate. They already have ballot access. So if he really does get that nomination and he's on the ballot, that should be a worry for both Biden and Trump's campaigns, because he does have the ability to take voters from both sides. And if he's got ballot access, it's going to matter.
And, worth mentioning that the Kennedy campaign announced today that he raised $7 million in the fourth quarter of last year. That's a big chunk of change. And if I'm a Republican or Democrat looking at that, my eyebrows are certainly raised. Moving further down the ballot, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert switched districts earlier this year, hoping to boost her chances of keeping a seat in the House. But a recent straw poll had her in 5th place. Is this a sign of hard times to come for the Colorado Congresswoman?
Yes. In one word, yes. She barely won her seat last time by a few hundred votes. Almost went to a recount. It did not. She's moving to a district that's completely outside where she was. The reason why she moved districts is because she read the writing on the wall in her current one. She was going to have a tough uphill battle. Straw polls are not elections, but they are certainly indicators of it. And, if you were her, you'd hope you at least come in 2nd or 3rd, but a 5th is pretty bad. And there's a lot of good candidates in that primary who are going to have money and also have name recognition. It's not looking good for her.
Yeah, we were certainly caught off guard last cycle when she, appeared to be losing and won by a very, very narrow margin. It seems like we're, predicting maybe a different outcome this time. But moving to the Senate, all eyes have been looming on the presidential election, but seats in the upper chamber are up for grabs. Decision Desk predicts a 59.3% chance for a GOP majority. Scott, what Senate races should we be watching as we go into 2024?
So the two that I'm looking at, and I'll give you 3: Ohio, Montana, and Arizona.
Okay.
Arizona is interesting. We'll start with that one just because it could potentially be a 3-way race between Kristen Sinema and the Democratic potential nominee, and it looks like potentially Carrie Lake on the Republican side if they make it all the way through. Just 3-way races, and especially in a state like Arizona where they take, a long time to count the vote, and there's been all that turmoil around there. That one will be a tough one to call and will be very close. Montana, you have, Senator John Tester, who is a Democrat in an extremely red state.
Yeah.
And managed to keep on his seat last time. He's got the incumbency. He's got the ability to win some of these real tough races. And the Republicans may or may not choose the best candidate against him. They've got an open primary there, and there's some candidates there who the NRSC wants, and there's some candidates they don't want, and we'll see what happens there. And then Ohio, you have Sherrod Brown, who probably not as tough as John Tester, but certainly knows how to win in a red state and has that, pedigree of a blue dog or Democrat who can fight for it. Now, Ohio is projected to go for Donald Trump as it did last time. So it'll be a tough state for him. But those are the 3 races that are going to be the toughest to call, and they're going to have tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars spent on them.
Scott, one more for you before you go. A new poll from Redfield and Wilton Strategies shows 18% of voters are more likely to vote for a candidate endorsed by the one and only Taylor Swift. Could T. Swift swing into this race?
You know what? Could she? It wouldn't be the first time she's dipped her toes into politics. She has done voter registration drives in the past. And, when she's done that, she's actually juiced voter registration. You know, I don't know. I don't know enough about Taylor Swift or should get into it, but she is highly influential. I mean, what? It's $200-300 a ticket. She's selling out stadiums left and right all over the world, including the United States. It's hard to say she's not going to have some sort of influence or at least have some sort of reach if she decides to take a position in politics this cycle.
Well, the question I'm asking is if she's going to make it in time from Tokyo to Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. I hope she does. I like seeing her at football games.
I think the NFL wants her to be there for that one. They'll make it happen. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Scott, as always, thank you so much for all of your wisdom.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.